There's a moment in sports where you watch something happen in real time and your brain almost refuses to process it. Not because it's complicated, not because it's ambiguous, but because what you're seeing is so blatant, so undeniable, that the fact that nothing was done about it makes you question whether the people running the show actually want it to stop. That moment happened on a WNBA court, in front of thousands of fans, millions of viewers at home, and, most importantly, directly in front of a referee who had a perfect, unobstructed view of the entire thing. Caitlin Clark took a fist to the throat. Not a nudge, not an accidental elbow in a scramble for a loose ball, a fist to the throat. And the referee? She watched it happen, turned away, and let the game continue like nothing occurred. That referee's name is Angelica Suffren, and what happened next, or more accurately what didn't happen next, sparked one of the most heated debates the WNBA has seen in years. Because this wasn't just about one bad call, this was about a league that seems to have a very specific blind spot. And that blind spot has a name, and her jersey number is 22. Before we get into everything, understand this. What you're about to hear isn't just a story about basketball. It's a story about power, about protection, about which players a league decides are worth defending and which ones it quietly decides to leave exposed. And when you see the full picture, the poster snub, the one-game suspensions, the missed calls, the coach defenses, and the ratings numbers that expose every contradiction, you're going to have a very hard time convincing yourself this is all just a coincidence. Let's start at the beginning, the moment that lit the entire conversation on fire. During a WNBA game, Alyssa Thomas connected with Caitlin Clark in a way that left absolutely no room for interpretation. Clark was moving, Thomas came in, and what followed was a direct strike to the throat area. Clean, visible, documented on video from multiple angles, replayed thousands of times across social media within hours of it happening. Now, contact happens in basketball. That's not the argument. The argument is about what followed, which was nothing. The whistle didn't blow. The game didn't stop. No foul was called, no technical, no review in the moment. Clark didn't get the call, didn't get the protection, and the game just moved on as if the entire thing was perfectly acceptable within the rules of professional basketball. And here is where Angelica Suffren enters the conversation. Suffren was positioned almost perfectly to catch this. She wasn't on the other end of the court, she wasn't blocked by a screen of players or caught looking the wrong direction at a critical moment. She had the view. She was right there, and the footage of her watching the play, watching Clark go down, and then letting the game continue, that footage spread everywhere. Clips, slow-motion replays, zoomed-in frames showing the exact moment she chose not to act. The internet did not let it go quietly. Social media posts started circulating almost immediately. Meet Angelica Suffren. That became the phrase attached to her name in every comment section, every thread, every reaction video that followed. People weren't just angry about the missed call, they were angry about what it represented. Because when you're a referee and you miss a call, that's a mistake. Mistakes happen. But when you are standing directly in the line of sight of a player getting hit in the throat and you still don't blow the whistle, that stops being a mistake and starts being something that requires a much harder conversation. The demand that followed was loud and unified. Review Angelica Suffren. Suspend her. Hold her accountable the same way players are held accountable when they step out of line. Because if players face consequences for what happens on the court, then the people tasked with policing those moments should face consequences when they fail to do their job.
Now, to be fair, the league did eventually respond. After the footage circulated, after the outrage built, after the media started to pick it up, the WNBA reviewed the incident and handed Alyssa Thomas a suspension. 1 game. Read that again. A player punched another player in the throat, on camera, in front of a referee who didn't call it, and the punishment handed down was 1 single game suspension. 1 game. The reaction was immediate and almost universal. Fans, analysts, former players, across the board, the response was some variation of disbelief. Because what message does a one-game suspension send? What does it communicate to every other player in that league about what is and isn't acceptable? The math is pretty simple. If the cost of targeting a specific player with a direct strike to the throat is missing one game, then the deterrent essentially doesn't exist. You sit out a Tuesday, you come back refreshed for the weekend, and the person you targeted has to continue playing in a league where the rulebook apparently has very flexible interpretations depending on who's involved. One commentator put it bluntly, at this point, players might as well start knocking each other out because the consequences clearly aren't significant enough to change anyone's behavior. And as dark as that sounds, it's hard to argue with the logic when you look at the precedent being set. The problem isn't just Alyssa Thomas. The problem is the signal the league sent with how it handled the situation. A weak response to a violent on-court incident doesn't just let one player off easy. It defines the culture. It tells every person in that league what they can get away with. And if what you can get away with includes hitting Caitlin Clark in the throat, then what exactly are the rules protecting against? If the league's response was frustrating, what came from the coaching staff was almost surreal. Nate Tibbetts, head coach of the Mercury, came out publicly in defense of Alyssa Thomas. Now, to a degree, you understand it. Coaches protect their players. That's part of the job. You don't throw your own roster under the bus when the cameras are rolling. But there's protecting your player, and then there's standing in front of clear video evidence and choosing to construct a narrative that directly contradicts what everyone just watched. Tibbetts went on record describing Thomas as someone who isn't cheap. He framed her as a competitor, as someone with a track record of playing hard, but playing within the spirit of the game. And while Thomas absolutely has a long career and a serious reputation in the league, none of that history changes what happened in that specific moment. Past character doesn't erase present action. That's not how accountability works in any professional setting, and sports shouldn't be an exception. The counterpoint came from Lisa Leslie, WNBA legend, someone who earned the right to speak about this league with authority built over decades. Leslie was direct. She said she was watching the game live. She saw it happen in real time, and her take was clear. The official missed that call. The league was right to hand down a suspension, and the broader issue of consistency in officiating needs to be addressed across the board, not selectively. But here's the thing that Leslie also touched on that doesn't get discussed enough. She talked about the culture of how players respond to accidental contact. In physical sports, things happen. Bodies collide, elbows fly. The difference between a rivalry and a genuine problem, she argued, often comes down to the aftermath. If you catch someone accidentally, you help them up, you acknowledge it. You show that whatever just happened wasn't malicious, wasn't targeted, wasn't intentional. That 5-second moment of basic human decency can change the entire narrative around an incident. That didn't happen here. There was no acknowledgement, no reaction that communicated regret or accident. And that absence, that silence in the moment where something human should have happened, shifted the entire weight of how the incident was interpreted.
Meanwhile, from the Connecticut side, voices were coming out to paint Thomas as the victim. Her teammates, people around her, began circulating a narrative that framed the suspension as unfair, as an overreaction, as the league caving to public pressure because a specific high-profile player was involved. And that narrative found an audience because in a league where politics and personalities are deeply intertwined, the story is rarely just about what happened on the court. Here's where the conversation gets more uncomfortable, because if this were an isolated incident, one bad call, one aggressive play, one moment of poor judgment, it would be easier to process. Mistakes happen, even in professional sports, even with real consequences attached. But this isn't isolated. Sophie Cunningham,
If you haven't been following the WNBA closely, that name might not immediately register. But for anyone who has been paying attention, Cunningham has been on the receiving end of physicality that would have shut down an NBA game within seconds of occurring. Thrown to the floor, elbowed, pushed, hit. The kind of contact that, in any other major professional sports league, would generate immediate ejections, significant fines, and lengthy suspensions designed to send a clear message about what isn't acceptable. In the WNBA, the response has been largely underwhelming. Calls get missed, reviews happen after the fact, fines get issued quietly, and the game moves on. And then there's Caitlin Clark herself, who, before the throat punch became the biggest story in the league, had already shown up to games with a black eye. A black eye on a professional athlete, on the biggest name currently drawing fans to the sport. And the discourse around it was somehow less explosive than it should have been, given the circumstances. Think about what that means. Think about the precedent that creates. If the most marketable player in your league is regularly showing up visibly marked by contact that happens during games, and the officiating structure isn't catching it, and the punishment structure isn't stopping it, then the message being sent, whether intentionally or not, is that this particular player is fair game, that she can be targeted, that the cost of doing so is low enough that it's worth the gamble. That is a catastrophic message for a league to send, and yet, here we are. The through line connecting all of these incidents isn't hard to find. It's a culture of physicality that has gone unchecked for long enough that players now operate with a reasonable expectation that certain actions won't carry significant consequences. And when you combine that culture with a specific player who draws attention, who sells tickets, who moves ratings, the targeting stops looking random and starts looking calculated. If you needed one image to summarize the WNBA's complicated, contradictory, almost self-destructive relationship with Caitlin Clark, the 30-year commemorative poster is it. The WNBA put out a poster celebrating 30 decades of the league, a milestone, a moment to honor the history of women's professional basketball in America, to showcase the players who built the sport and the names currently carrying it forward. A celebration of everything the league has become and everyone who contributed to getting it there. Caitlin Clark is not on it. Paige Beckers is on it. Angel Reese is on it. Players who, by any objective metric, have not yet had the on-court impact or the off-court cultural footprint that Clark has generated in her time in the league. And yet, Clark, the player whose arrival in the WNBA triggered a seismic shift in how people talked about, watched, and engaged with the sport, is absent. The numbers make this even harder to rationalize. When Clark entered the WNBA, the league had to physically relocate her road games to larger arenas, not because the home teams requested it, not because the venues were being renovated, because the demand from fans showing up specifically to watch Caitlin Clark play exceeded what the existing facilities could hold. The league was moving games to bigger buildings because of one player. Before Clark, WNBA travel involved the back rows of Southwest Airlines flights. That was the reality of professional women's basketball travel at that level. After Clark's impact became undeniable, the league transitioned to private jets. One player's marketability changed the logistics and the economics of how the entire league operated day to day.
Her TV ratings are not comparable to her peers. They double them. A'ja Wilson is widely considered the best player in the WNBA, 3-time champion, 4-time MVP, the most decorated active player in the league by almost any measure. Clark's games draw double the television audience that Wilson's games attract. Double. Not slightly more, not a modest bump. Double. And she's not on the 30-year poster. The comparison that keeps coming up, and it's apt, is imagining a 30-year celebration of football that somehow manages to leave out both Lionel Messi and Cristiano Ronaldo, two players so synonymous with the sport, so fundamentally responsible for the level of global attention the game receives, that their absence from any historical retrospective would be immediately recognized as absurd.
That's the equivalent of what the WNBA just did. It's either an embarrassing administrative oversight carried out by people who genuinely don't understand their own league's dynamics, or it's deliberate. And both of those possibilities should concern anyone who wants to see the WNBA succeed long-term. Because incompetence and intentional bias are both existential problems for an institution trying to grow. There's a specific kind of self-destruction that happens when an institution becomes more focused on internal politics than on the product it's supposed to be building. When the people in charge are more invested in managing narratives, protecting certain relationships, and maintaining existing power structures than they are in doing what's objectively best for the league's future. The WNBA is currently exhibiting every symptom of that condition. Consider what they have in Caitlin Clark, a generational talent, a genuinely polarizing, compelling, discussed everywhere public figure whose presence in your league has already shifted economics, audiences, travel logistics, and cultural conversations. A player whose games people who have never watched a single minute of women's basketball are tuning in to watch. That is extraordinarily rare. That is the kind of asset that most struggling sports leagues would build their entire future strategy around. Instead, what's happening? The officiating structure is failing to protect her from targeted physical contact. The punishment handed down for one of the most visible incidents of that contact is a single-game suspension. A commemorative piece of league history is released that somehow omits her name and likeness entirely. And when the outrage builds, as it always does now because Clark has a following that pays close attention, the responses from league voices range from defensive to dismissive to borderline absurd. This is a league driving full speed toward a wall that it can clearly see and somehow choosing not to turn the wheel. And what makes it more layered is that this isn't just about Caitlin Clark as an individual. When you allow a pattern of targeted physical contact to go insufficiently punished, you're not just failing one player, you're failing every player in your league who might one day be in a similar position. When officiating is inconsistent to the point where a fist to the throat doesn't get called in real time, every player on every court is less safe. The protection deficit doesn't just apply to the most famous name on the roster. But the optics, the appearance of what's happening, are centered on Clark because she's the one absorbing the most visible incidents, and those optics are terrible for the league in ways that go beyond any single controversy. Let's be specific, because vague criticism without direction isn't useful. The officiating accountability structure in the WNBA needs to be real. Referees who miss calls of this magnitude, a punch to the throat with a clear line of sight, should face a formal review process that carries actual consequences. Not just an internal note, not just a quiet conversation behind closed doors, a transparent, documented review that the public can understand and trust. Because right now, the only accountability happening is on social media, where people are posting clips and demanding answers because the institutional response has been insufficient. The suspension framework needs to reflect the severity of the incidents it's responding to. One game for striking another player in the throat is not a deterrent, it's barely even a speed bump. If the league is serious about player safety, about protecting every person on that court, regardless of their profile or their team affiliation, the consequences need to communicate that seriousness. Right now, they don't.
The cultural dynamic within the league, where certain players are being defended as victims after committing clear acts of aggression, needs to be examined honestly. When teammates and coaches construct narratives that position the aggressor as the wronged party, and when those narratives find traction, it reflects something deeper than PR strategy. It reflects a league culture that hasn't fully reckoned with how it wants to handle accountability. And the marketing decisions, the poster, the coverage choices, the ways in which the league presents its own history and its current stars need to stop undermining the exact player who is doing the most to drive new audiences into the product. You cannot simultaneously benefit from Caitlin Clark's impact and treat her as though she's inconvenient to your existing narrative. That contradiction has a cost, and eventually,
that cost gets paid. The frustrating reality about all of this is that none of it had to happen. The WNBA right now is sitting on a genuine opportunity, not just with Clark, but because of the conversation Clark's arrival sparked about women's basketball, about athletic excellence, about what professional women's sports can look like when people are paying attention. That opportunity is still there, but it's being eroded by a series of decisions, some large, some small, some seemingly symbolic, that collectively signal to the watching world that the people in charge of the league are not fully committed to the kind of growth that this moment demands. Caitlin Clark is going to be fine. She has shown repeatedly that she can absorb everything being thrown at her, on the court and off it, and keep performing at an elite level. Her audience isn't going anywhere. The interest in her story, her game, and yes, the controversies surrounding her treatment in this league is only growing. The question isn't whether Clark will survive this moment. The question is whether the WNBA will. Because the path they're currently on, missing calls, handing out soft suspensions, leaving their most marketable player off anniversary posters, while simultaneously cashing the checks her audience generates, is not a path toward relevance. It's a path toward a very specific kind of institutional embarrassment, where the league becomes the villain in its own success story. And the worst part? The ref had a perfect view of all of it, and still didn't blow the whistle. Maybe that's the most honest metaphor for everything happening right now. The people in the best position to stop it are watching it unfold directly in front of them, and somehow the whistle stays silent. What happens next is up to the league, but the audience is watching, and unlike Angelica Suffren, they're not looking away.